She hadn't touched the box under her bed in 30 years, until a Lakota boy she'd never seen before handed her a letter and said, "It's from someone who remembered." Mabel Carter froze on the porch step, broom in one hand, the other trembling as she reached for the envelope like it might vanish. Her name was written in a hand she hadn't seen since she was a girl, curved in slow ink that once made her believe in a future. No one wrote her name anymore. Not in that way. Not like it mattered. The boy stood silently at her gate, dark hair tied back, eyes older than his years. He didn't blink, didn't explain, just waited. "Who sent this?" she whispered. "He said you'd know," the boy replied. Then he turned and walked away, steps light as wind, like he'd been sent by memory itself. Mabel clutched the letter to her chest and sank into the rocking chair that faced west. The broom rolled off her lap, forgotten. Her heart beat louder than the noon bell from the chapel. She stared at the paper. She didn't open it. Not yet. Just stared. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her and seen anything worth writing to. She wasn't bitter. Not exactly. Just worn down by time and whispered things. Too old, too quiet, too proud, too late. She remembered when men used to tip their hats, when she used to laugh in parlors and catch glances during church. Then years passed. Then decades. And now her name came only when children asked who lived in the house with the empty porch. But someone had remembered. Someone had told a boy to find her and put this folded piece of memory in her hands. And that meant something still lived where she thought everything had gone still. The letter waited. So did she. But something had already shifted inside her. And outside, the dust on the porch stirred in a breeze that hadn't blown in years. The letter opened easy, but her hands didn't. Mabel sat by the window with the lamp low, the envelope resting in her lap like a bird she wasn't sure how to free. The paper inside was yellowed, but folded neat, the creases clean, as if someone had been waiting a long time to send it. She unfolded it slow, scared of what she might find, scared of what she wouldn't. The handwriting hit her like a hammer. Tight, sharp, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. One name stood at the bottom. Elias Reed, the boy from her father's wheat field, the one who left for the war with a promise and never came back. She pressed her fingers to the name like it could speak. Her lips moved without sound. She hadn't said it aloud in decades. Elias, he'd been 19, wild, kind, a terrible dancer. She was 17, stubborn, full of laughter no one remembered anymore. They used to sit under the oak tree and talk about building a porch swing and naming daughters after rivers. Then the war came. He kissed her hand, said he'd write every week, but he never did. They said his regiment was lost in Missouri. She buried him in her heart and never dug the grave twice. And now, a letter. In his hand. "If you're reading this," it began, "then the boy found you. And if he found you, that means I lasted longer than I thought." Her eyes filled. She blinked hard. The words blurred. "I didn't forget you, Mabel, not a single day. I didn't write because I couldn't find the right kind of paper to hold what I owed you." She read on, every word a step backward into a life she'd folded away. "I met a woman. Lakota. Her name's Awen. We had a son. He's the one who brought this to you. I told him about you, about the girl who made me believe I could be more than a body in a ditch." Mabel covered her mouth, the breath gone from her lungs. She looked out the window, past the trees, past the dust, toward the past she'd buried so carefully. Somewhere out there, Elias had lived, had remembered, and had sent her a piece of the life he made. Too late to be his bride, but not too late to matter. The boy returned the next morning before the sun finished rising. Mabel hadn't slept. She'd read the letter 5 times, then placed it under her pillow like it could hold off the ache that had come rushing in through its folds. When she stepped out onto the porch, he was already standing there, same satchel slung over his shoulder, same quiet stillness. She stared at him this time, really stared, and saw it. Elias's eyes, not just the color but the shape, that same gaze, steady but soft, like it had seen too much and still chose kindness. "You're his boy," she said. He nodded. "He told me your name before I could write my own." She swallowed hard. "How long ago?" "He passed last spring," the boy said. "Buried him by the river. Same place he used to tell stories about you." Her hand gripped the porch railing. "Stories?" "About the girl with the braid who used to beat him at checkers, the one he called the only promise I ever meant." Mabel looked away. The words hit something raw, something that hadn't been touched since her 20s. "He said if anything ever happened to him, I should find you," the boy added. "Tell you he didn't forget, not ever." She sat down slowly, breath catching. "And your mother?" "Gone before I turned 8. He raised me with stories and silence." He was always better with his hands than with words. "He learned to write for you," the boy said. "Kept the letters he never sent in a box under his bed. This was the only one addressed." Mabel pressed her hands together, tears threatening again. "He said you deserved more than remembering." The boy stepped forward, pulled a folded scrap from his pocket. Smaller, newer. "He left this too. Said to give it to you after?" She opened it. 3 lines. "You were my first kindness, my last prayer. If there's another life, save me a seat." Mabel laughed then, cracked and trembling, but laughter all the same, the kind that comes when grief finally lets go of the throat. The boy smiled. "He said you might laugh at that." She wiped her eyes. "He was always right about me, just a little too late." She hadn't walked through town in months, not past the post office, not past the mercantile, and certainly not along the church road where whispers lived in wooden steps. But that morning, with Elias's son beside her and the letter folded neatly in her shawl pocket, Mabel Carter walked. People noticed, heads turned in slow surprise. Some nodded. Most just stared. It wasn't the boy they looked at. It was her, a woman they'd filed under unmarried and too late, now walking like she carried a reason. She passed the bakery, where old Mrs. Albright nearly dropped her pie tin. "Mabel," she said, breathless. "My word, you're out early." "Thought it was time," Mabel replied. She didn't explain. She didn't smile. But she nodded toward the boy and said, "This is Elias's son." That shut the whispers up faster than a sermon bell. The name hit the street like a match. Elias Reed, lost in the war, presumed dead, now alive in memory and flesh. The boy walked beside her, calm, unreadable. She could feel the weight of his presence, the shape of a story walking with her that no one else could fully hold. At the chapel steps, they paused. Mabel looked at the oak doors she hadn't entered in years. "He used to wait for me outside those doors," she said. "Never liked the sound of preachers." The boy smiled faintly. "He said God didn't need to be shouted at." She chuckled. "He said that? Said you taught him it. I suppose I did." They continued past the church, past the general store where someone muttered, "That her boy?" And another answered, "No. But he walks like he could be." Mabel didn't correct them. She let them think, let them wonder. For the first time in her life, she felt no need to explain what belonged to her. They reached the end of town where the land opened back into wind and prairie. The boy looked up at her. "You want me to go?" She paused, looked down at the hand she hadn't realized he was holding. "No," she said softly. I want to show you where I buried the letters he never sent." His fingers tightened just slightly, and together they turned toward the hill where memory still waited, patient as ever. The hill behind the house wasn't marked by crosses or fences, just a crooked willow and a circle of flat stones half swallowed by earth. She'd chosen it because the wind sounded different there. Softer, like the land wasn't angry yet. That's where she'd buried them. Every letter she wrote and never sent. Every word she etched in the dark when the ache got too loud and no one was left to listen. She carried the spade in one hand, the boys in the other, and said nothing until they reached the tree. "I buried them here," she said. 27 in all." The boy crouched beside her as she dug, his silence more respectful than most grown men's prayers. The tin box emerged slow, rusted at the corners, still sealed. She wiped it clean with the edge of her shawl, fingers shaking not from effort, but from the sudden weight of being seen. She opened it. The paper was yellowed, some stuck together, but the writing remained. Pages filled with heartbreak, small joys, anger, longing, words like, "You promised me a swing. I saw your brother last week. I held your name in my mouth last night like a secret I couldn't swallow." The boy read quietly, lips moving but voice withheld. "He'd have cried," he said eventually. He always cried over small things. "He cried?" she asked. "Only when he spoke of you." She looked out over the grass. "I never stopped talking to him. Just stopped expecting an answer. Now you have one." She closed the box, but gently, like tucking a child in. "I kept these because they were all I had. Now they're not mine anymore." She handed the box to him. "Take them. When you're old, read them again. Know that your father was loved before you, and your blood carries more than just his silence." The boy nodded, hugged the box to his chest. "He'd have asked you to come back with me. Would you?" He paused. "Yes." She took a breath that filled her in places she didn't know were empty. "Then maybe I will, after one more season of listening to the wind." He didn't speak, just sat beside her. And for the first time in decades, Mabel Carter didn't feel like she was waiting for anything at all. The well behind the chapel hadn't drawn a proper line of townsfolk in years, not since the new pump house came up near the Crossroads. But Mabel went there anyway, every Wednesday, same time, same path. Said the water there tasted like truth. Cleaner, colder, less touched by the noise of progress. That Wednesday the boy walked with her. No one stopped them, but many watched. The town had grown used to her quiet, not her shadow. Not a child at her side. At the well she dropped the pail down, waited for the echo to hit the walls. When she drew it up, another woman was waiting. Widow Thompson. White gloves, stern mouth. The one who once said aloud in church that some women just weren't made for sharing their last names. Mabel braced for it. The jab, the nod, the question wrapped in pity. But none came. Instead, the widow said, "I saw him. Elias, at a soldier's camp. Years ago, he asked about you." Mabel's throat caught. "He did. Said if he didn't make it back, someone ought to tell you he never stopped meaning it. The promise." The word landed heavy. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mabel asked. "Because I thought you already knew. And because I was jealous. He never looked at me that way." The air shifted. The wind didn't blow, but the trees swayed. Mabel handed the pail to the boy. "Go on ahead, I'll catch up." When he was gone, she turned back to the widow. "You could have said something. I didn't know how. None of us do. That's why we write letters." The widow looked down. "He loved you." "I know," Mabel said. "But more than that, he remembered me, all the way to the end. Do you know what that's worth in a town that forgot my name before it ever learned my story?" The widow nodded. "I do now." They stood there, old rivals made soft by time and unfinished pages. Mabel didn't offer forgiveness, but she didn't need to. The well had already drawn enough truth to make it right. She walked back with her head higher, the boy waiting by the fence. "What took you so long?" he asked. She smiled. "Someone finally said the thing I waited 40 years to hear." Behind the house, just past the lilac bush her mother planted during the first thaw of '49, stood 2 rusted posts where a porch swing was meant to hang. Elias had promised it, said he'd carve their initials into the seat and paint the wood sky blue so she could sit there and rock the years away. But war had come, and then silence, and the swing remained a pair of waiting arms with nothing to hold. That evening, the boy wandered behind the house and paused by the frame. "You were going to build one?" he asked. She nodded from the porch. "He promised it before he ever kissed me." "Why didn't you finish it?" "Because promises should be shared, not completed alone." The boy ran a hand along the beam, then stepped back and looked at the shape. "We could build it now," he said. "If you want." Mabel stood, slower than she used to, but steadier than ever. "What would you carve into it?" "Your name," he said. "And his and mine, so no one forgets." She smiled, quiet, deep, like water that had run beneath the surface too long. "You know how to use a chisel?" "He taught me before he taught me to ride." "Then let's do it right," she said. They worked in the shed, dust thick in the air, boards stacked like bones waiting to be claimed. The boy planed the wood while Mabel wiped each piece clean, her fingers moving with a care usually reserved for memory. When the frame was done, they painted it sky blue, just like he'd said. She didn't cry. Not then. Not even when they hoisted the chain, and the seat swung for the first time in the breeze. But when she sat down and felt the way it held her, the way it creaked softly like someone breathing beside her, she reached into her pocket, pulled out the letter, and kissed the name at the bottom. "Took you long enough," she whispered. The boy didn't ask what she meant. He just sat beside her, and together they rocked the years away, some behind them, some still to come, on a swing that finally held the weight of everything that never got the chance to be said. The plates were mismatched, one with a chip shaped like Oklahoma, the other faded from too many scrubbings. She hadn't set a table for 2 since her father passed, not even for the neighbor who used to bring pies and pretend not to look disappointed when she never invited him inside. But that evening, Mabel laid out silverware with precision, folded napkins like it mattered, and even lit the stub of a candle she'd tucked away in a drawer back when she still believed in guests. The boy sat across from her, posture proud but eyes unsure, like no one had ever shown him the quiet ritual of being wanted. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "It's the first time in a long while I knew who'd be sitting across from me." The stew wasn't fancy, just beans, rabbit, and onions from her garden, but it filled the room with warmth. "My father used to talk about food like it was memory," he said. "Said certain meals brought back the people you missed." She smiled softly. "This one tastes like Sunday after church, 1865, Mama humming by the stove, Papa falling asleep in his boots." The boy took a bite, nodded. Tastes like he was right. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only lives between those who have both lost and endured. When the plates were empty, Mabel rose and reached for a small tin from the mantel. "He sent something else," she said. "Didn't include it with the letter. I kept it back until I knew you were staying." She opened the tin and pulled out a thin leather cord, strung with a ring. Simple, unadorned, but worn soft at the edges. He carved it from bone, said he never had the nerve to give it to me before he left. The boy reached out slowly, reverently. He kept this? Slept with it in his pocket, she said. Now it belongs with you. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. His fingers closed around it like someone claiming not just an heirloom, but a truth. Mabel sat back down, folded her hands in her lap, and whispered, "Now the table looks right." And for the first time in her life, it did. The plates were mismatched, one with a chip shaped like Oklahoma, the other faded from too many scrubbings. She hadn't set a table for two since her father passed, not even for the neighbor who used to bring pies and pretend not to look disappointed when she never invited him inside. But that evening, Mabel laid out silverware with precision, folded napkins like it mattered, and even lit the stub of a candle she'd tucked away in a drawer back when she still believed in guests. The boy sat across from her, posture proud but eyes unsure, like no one had ever shown him the quiet ritual of being wanted. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "It's the first time in a long while I knew who'd be sitting across from me." The stew wasn't fancy, just beans, rabbit, and onions from her garden, but it filled the room with warmth. "My father used to talk about food like it was memory," he said. "Said certain meals brought back the people you missed." She smiled softly. "This one tastes like Sunday after church, 1865, Mama humming by the stove, Papa falling asleep in his boots." The boy took a bite, nodded. Tastes like he was right. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only lives between those who have both lost and endured. When the plates were empty, Mabel rose and reached for a small tin from the mantel. "He sent something else," she said. "Didn't include it with the letter. I kept it back until I knew you were staying." She opened the tin and pulled out a thin leather cord, strung with a ring. Simple, unadorned, but worn soft at the edges. "He carved it from bone, said he never had the nerve to give it to me before he left." The boy reached out slowly, reverently. "He kept this?" "Slept with it in his pocket," she said. "Now it belongs with you." He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. His fingers closed around it like someone claiming not just an heirloom, but a truth. Mabel sat back down, folded her hands in her lap, and whispered, "Now the table looks right." And for the first time in her life, it did. The swing creaked softly as it moved, back and forth, under a sky scrubbed clean by the storm. Mabel sat with her braid tucked beneath her shawl, hands folded over her lap, the boy asleep inside with a book across his chest, and the fire burned low. She watched the sunset smear across the hills like a letter from the sky, unfinished, tender, written in colors she hadn't seen in decades. For years, the town had called her stubborn, strange, left behind, the last unmarried woman on her street, a shadow in the window, too old to begin again. But no one had asked who she was waiting for, and no one had guessed that love might come, not as a husband, but as a letter folded in the hand of a child whose face looked like memory and mercy at once. Elias never returned, not in the way boys do with rings and plans and houses to build. But he'd remembered. He'd written. He'd loved her across decades. And in doing so, he'd rewritten her ending. She hadn't worn white, she hadn't walked down an aisle, but she'd been chosen. Fully. Finally. Without apology. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the scrap of paper she'd carried for days. Not the old letter. A new one. Her own. Just 3 lines. I waited. I wept. And I forgave us both. She placed it inside the tin box where her first letters had once slept, closed it gently, and set it on the railing beside a jar of lilacs. Tomorrow she'd give it to the boy. Tell him to read it when he was older. Tell him that sometimes love doesn't arrive on time, but it still arrives. Behind her, the fire crackled. The house no longer felt like a memory. It felt lived in, claimed, known. She leaned back, let the swing hold her weight, and whispered into the cooling air. I was never too old, just waiting for something worth beginning. The wind picked up again, gentle this time, and carried the scent of lilac and smoke across the porch. And Mabel Carter, who never married, rocked steady in the arms of something far deeper than a vow. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Echoes of the West, and tell us in the comments, do you believe it's ever truly too late to be chosen?